When a research station on ice planet Niflheim goes dark, the galactic community dismisses humans as too fragile for the rescue mission. But Chief Medical Officer Ryia Novak and her human rescue team prove that adaptability, endurance, and sheer determination make humans the perfect species for impossible survival situations. The alert pierced through Galactic Emergency Response Center's night cycle, its urgent frequency indicating a level -1 distress signal from Niflheim, the ice planet where even the hardiest species feared to tread. Commander Zixtal's crystalline appendages trembled as she processed the incoming data. The Niflheim research station, home to 32 researchers from 7 different species, had gone dark. Atmospheric temperature dropping below -270 Celsius. Her second-in-command, Officer Vrel, reported, their bioluminescent patches pulsing with concern. Station's thermal shields are failing. Last transmission indicates complete power grid failure. Dr. Ryia Novak, the human chief of emergency operations, burst into the command center, her breath visible even in the carefully regulated station air. I am assembling my rescue team now. The Frost Wolves can deploy in 20 minutes. The designation drew immediate scoffs from the gathered emergency council. Counselor Thex, a Jovian with metallic scales designed for deep space survival, lifted their massive head. With respect, Doctor, this is beyond human capabilities. Your species can barely tolerate mild temperature variations without artificial assistance. The Frost Wolves are specifically trained for extreme cold weather rescue, Ryia countered, pulling up hollow projections of her team's credentials. Lieutenant Kaz Torres developed our survival protocols on Earth's Mount Everest. Dr. Nikolai Winter literally wrote the manual on hypothermia prevention in vacuum conditions. This isn't some frozen mountain, Vrel interjected. Niflheim makes your Arctic look like a summer resort. We need to wait for the Cryonian rescue team. The Cryonians are 3 days out. Rhea's voice carried the sharp edge of someone who'd fought this battle before. Those researchers don't have 3 hours. Commander Zixtal's crystalline form refracted the emergency lights as she considered the options. The human's assessment is correct regarding time frame, but their biological limitations. Our limitations are exactly why we'll succeed, Ryia interrupted, bringing up thermal imaging of the station. We've evolved to survive and thrive in rapidly changing conditions. While other species need perfect environmental suits, we can adapt. We don't just endure cold. We've learned to work with it. Impossible, Counselor Thex rumbled. Your internal temperature regulation is primitive at best. The emergency beacon's pitch suddenly changed, indicating another critical system failure at the research station. Rya's team was already suited up in the hangar, running final checks on their modified rescue shuttle. You can debate our qualifications while we're en route, Ryia stated, heading for the door. But we're going. Those researchers don't care what species saves them. They just need saving. Now, Commander Zixtal's crystalline form vibrated in resignation. Very well. But I am sending Officer Vrel to observe and document. When, if you fail. We need to know why. Ryia nodded curtly, already mentally calculating approach vectors through Niflheim's perpetual ice storms. Welcome aboard, officer. Hope you are ready to witness what humans can really do. As the command center doors sealed behind her, Counselor Thex's rumbling voice carried down the corridor. They're going to get themselves killed. Maybe? Commander Zixtal responded. But notice she didn't even hesitate when faced with those odds. Perhaps that's worth observing, too. In the cramped shuttle prep bay, Officer Vrel watched with a mixture of fascination and horror as the human rescue team performed their final equipment checks. Unlike the sleek environmental suits preferred by most species, the humans wore what looked like layers of primitive fabric and composite materials. Lieutenant Kaz Torres, the team's tactical lead, caught Vrel's puzzled gaze. Confused by our gear? Traditional sealed suits are too rigid for the kind of mobility we need. These layers trap air and allow us to adapt our insulation as conditions change. Dr. Nikolai Winter, their medical specialist, was methodically checking everyone's neural monitors. His weathered face bore scars from what Vrel learned were frostbite incidents during his research years. Rather than hiding these imperfections with regenerative treatment, he wore them like badges of honor. The key to cold survival isn't perfect protection, he explained, adjusting the monitor on their combat specialist, Brook Tundra. It's understanding how your body responds and working with those responses. Humans don't just resist cold, we adapt to it. That's scientifically impossible, Vrel protested. Your species lacks basic thermal regulation capabilities. You don't even have fur or subcutaneous fat layers like most cold-adapted species. Brooke laughed while checking her climbing gear. We've got something better. We've got brown fat activation, peripheral vasoconstriction, and the stubbornness to keep moving when everything says we should freeze. Ryia emerged from the shuttle's cockpit, where she'd been programming approach vectors. Final checks. Frost wolves. Niflheim's atmosphere is showing increased particle density. We'll be flying blind for most of the descent. Statistically speaking, Vrel interjected, your chances of surviving the landing are— We don't need statistics, interrupted their engineering specialist, Dakota Frost, looking up from a makeshift heating unit she was modifying. We need to get those researchers out. Everything else is just details. The team's sixth member, communications expert River Stone, was already patched into the station's failing systems. Got fragmentary life signs from 3 different sections. Power cycling through emergency backups every 6 minutes. Temperatures dropping fast enough to crack standard hull materials. Vrel's bioluminescent patches pulsed with alarm. The hull is cracking? That makes this rescue impossible. Even if you survive the landing, the station's structural integrity— Nothing's impossible, Ryia cut in, her voice carrying that peculiar human blend of authority and inspiration that Vrel had observed in their leadership. We've trained for this. Every member of this team has survived conditions that their own species said they couldn't. We do the impossible because we don't waste time believing in limitations. The shuttle's warning system blared, indicating their launch window was approaching. Vrel watched in amazement as the humans performed one final ritual, touching their fists together in what they called a bump while sharing grim smiles. Remember, Ryia addressed her team, we're not just proving humans can handle this. We're showing the galaxy that sometimes the most effective rescue team isn't the strongest or most naturally suited species. It's the one that's learned to overcome their limitations through innovation and teamwork. And stubbornness, Brooke added with a fierce grin. Don't forget the stubbornness. As they boarded the shuttle, Vrel's scientific training warred with what they were witnessing. These humans weren't just ignoring the impossible odds. They seemed energized by them. Their vital signs showed elevated stress responses, yet instead of shutting down, they appeared to be channeling that stress into heightened focus and determination. Last chance to stay behind, Ryia offered Vrel as the shuttle's engines began their warm-up sequence. Vrel's patches rippled with resignation. My job is to document either your success or failure, though I am beginning to suspect neither term means quite the same thing to humans as it does to the rest of us. Good observation, Ryia smiled, strapping in. Now let's go show you what those terms mean to the Frostwolves. Niflheim's upper atmosphere greeted the rescue shuttle with a barrage of ice crystals that pinged against the hull like miniature artillery. Through the cockpit's reinforced viewport, the planet's surface was barely visible, an endless expanse of whites and grays churning in violent patterns. Impact tolerance at 82% and dropping, River called out, fingers dancing across the environmental controls. These aren't normal ice crystals. They're forming into structures I've never seen before. Ryia wrestled with the controls, compensating for wind shears that seemed to defy physics. Dakota, how's our hull integrity? Holding, but these crystal formations are interesting, Dakota replied, studying the sensor readings. They're actually growing on contact, creating lattice patterns that— A violent shudder cut through the shuttle, throwing Vrel against their restraints. Their bioluminescent patches flashed in alarm as they watched frost patterns spread across the internal walls, something that should have been impossible given their environmental shielding. Temperatures dropping faster than our systems can compensate, Nikolai reported calmly, as if discussing weather at a picnic. We're looking at external temps approaching -300 Celsius. Vrel's voice wavered. That's well below your species' survival threshold. Theory and practice are different things, Brooke responded, already pulling on her advanced climbing gear. Watch and learn. The shuttle broke through the lower cloud layer, revealing the research station, or what was left of it. The massive structure, designed to house dozens of researchers in comfort, was now barely recognizable under layers of alien ice formations. Crystalline growths had penetrated the outer walls, creating bizarre architectural patterns that sparkled deadly in their landing lights. Those aren't normal ice formations, Dakota muttered, her engineer's mind already analyzing the patterns. The crystal structure is almost alive. Landing zones compromised, Ryia announced, fighting the controls as another sheer wind threatened to flip them. We'll have to set down half a kilometer out and approach on foot. On foot? Vrel's patches pulsed in disbelief. In these conditions? Even with your protective gear, exposure will kill you in minutes. Kaz was already distributing their specialized survival packs. Good thing we work fast then. The shuttle touched down with a bone-jarring crunch, its landing struts settling into ice that seemed to reach up to grasp them. Within seconds, frost patterns began creeping across their viewport. 60 seconds to gear check, Ryia ordered, unstrapping. River, maintain shuttle systems for emergency evac. Everyone else, remember your training. We move fast, we stay together, and we do not stop until we reach that station. Vrel watched in fascination as the humans performed what seemed like a practice dance, layering their protective gear, checking each other's seals, and activating their thermal regulation systems. But what truly caught their attention was the change in the humans' demeanor. Their vital signs should have been showing extreme stress, yet their readings indicated something else entirely, a state of heightened focus that humans called the zone. The crystals are definitely exhibiting some form of molecular intelligence, Dakota reported, studying readings from her handheld scanner. They're not just growing, they're adapting to our presence. Save the science for later, Brooke called out, securing her rescue harness. We've got people counting on us. As the shuttle's hatch opened, the full fury of Niflheim's atmosphere howled into their faces. The cold was beyond cold. It was an active force that seemed to seek out any vulnerability, any gap in their protection. Vrel's environmental suit immediately began compensating, yet they still felt the bite. But the humans stepped out into that hell with purpose in their stride. Remember, Rhea's voice came through their comms, steady despite the howling wind. We're not fighting the cold, we're working with it. Use your training, trust your instincts, and keep moving. Niflheim's upper atmosphere greeted the rescue shuttle with a barrage of ice crystals that pinged against the hull like miniature artillery. Through the cockpit's reinforced viewport, the planet's surface was barely visible, an endless expanse of whites and grays churning in violent patterns. Impact tolerance at 82% and dropping, River called out, fingers dancing across the environmental controls. These aren't normal ice crystals. They're forming into structures I've never seen before. Ryia wrestled with the controls, compensating for wind shears that seemed to defy physics. Dakota, how's our hull integrity? Holding, but these crystal formations are interesting, Dakota replied, studying the sensor readings. They're actually growing on contact, creating lattice patterns that a violent shudder cut through the shuttle, throwing Vrel against their restraints. Their bioluminescent patches flashed in alarm as they watched frost patterns spread across the internal walls, something that should have been impossible given their environmental shielding. Temperatures dropping faster than our systems can compensate, Nikolai reported calmly, as if discussing weather at a picnic. We're looking at external temps approaching -300 Celsius. Vrel's voice wavered. That's well below your species' survival threshold. Theory and practice are different things, Brooke responded, already pulling on her advanced climbing gear. Watch and learn. The shuttle broke through the lower cloud layer, revealing the research station, or what was left of it. The massive structure, designed to house dozens of researchers in comfort, was now barely recognizable under layers of alien ice formations. Crystalline growths had penetrated the outer walls, creating bizarre architectural patterns that sparkled deadly in their landing lights. Those aren't normal ice formations, Dakota muttered, her engineer's mind already analyzing the patterns. The crystal structure is almost alive. Landing zones compromised, Ryia announced, fighting the controls as another sheer wind threatened to flip them. We'll have to set down half a kilometer out and approach on foot. On foot? Vrel's patches pulsed in disbelief. In these conditions, even with your protective gear, exposure will kill you in minutes. Kaz was already distributing their specialized survival packs. Good thing we work fast then. The shuttle touched down with a bone-jarring crunch, its landing struts settling into ice that seemed to reach up to grasp them. Within seconds, frost patterns began creeping across their viewport. 60 seconds to gear check, Ryia ordered, unstrapping. River, maintain shuttle systems for emergency evac. Everyone else, remember your training. We move fast, we stay together, and we do not stop until we reach that station. Vrel watched in fascination as the humans performed what seemed like a practiced dance, layering their protective gear, checking each other's seals, and activating their thermal regulation systems. But what truly caught their attention was the change in the humans' demeanor. Their vital signs should have been showing extreme stress, yet their readings indicated something else entirely, a state of heightened focus that humans called the zone. The crystals are definitely exhibiting some form of molecular intelligence, Dakota reported, studying readings from her handheld scanner. They're not just growing, they're adapting to our presence. Save the science for later, Brooke called out, securing her rescue harness. We've got people counting on us. As the shuttle's hatch opened, the full fury of Niflheim's atmosphere howled into their faces. The cold was beyond cold. It was an active force that seemed to seek out any vulnerability, any gap in their protection. Vrel's environmental suit immediately began compensating, yet they still felt the bite. But the humans stepped out into that hell with purpose in their stride. Remember, Rhea's voice came through their comms, steady despite the howling wind. We're not fighting the cold. We're working with it. Use your training, trust your instincts, and keep moving. Vrel watched as the team formed up, each member checking their neighbors, maintaining physical contact through guidelines. Their movements were efficient, purposeful, and somehow beautiful in their coordination. Coming, observer, Kaz called back, his voice carrying a hint of challenge. Vrel stepped out into the storm, their scientific mind recording every detail of what should have been impossible. The humans weren't just surviving. They were functioning with practiced precision in conditions that would kill most species in moments. And they were smiling. Vrel watched as the team formed up, each member checking their neighbors, maintaining physical contact through guidelines. Their movements were efficient, purposeful, and somehow beautiful in their coordination. Coming, observer, Kaz called back, his voice carrying a hint of challenge. Vrel stepped out into the storm, their scientific mind recording every detail of what should have been impossible. The humans weren't just surviving. They were functioning with practiced precision in conditions that would kill most species in moments. And they were smiling. The approach to Niflheim Research Station revealed the true scope of their challenge. What had once been a state-of-the-art facility now resembled a twisted ice sculpture, with crystalline formations piercing through reinforced walls like nature's spears. Structural analysis shows 3 main breach points. Dakota through chattering teeth, her scanner struggling against the interference. The crystal growths seemed to be following the station's power conduits, almost like they're feeding off the energy. Nikolai's medical sensors painted an equally concerning picture. Getting faint life signs from multiple locations. Body temperatures are critically low across all species. We need to move fast. Vrel observed as the humans adjusted their pace through the deepening ice field, their movements displaying a peculiar efficiency. Instead of fighting against the howling wind, they angled their bodies to deflect it, using the very force that should have hindered them to maintain their balance. Notice how they're conserving energy, Ryia explained, catching Vrel's analytical gaze. Humans learned long ago that survival in extreme conditions isn't about brute force. It's about adaptation and efficiency. The team reached the station's main airlock, now sealed beneath a layer of the strange crystalline ice. Brooke stepped forward, pulling out what looked like primitive tools, a simple ice axe and pittance. Conventional cutting tools would shatter in these temperatures, she explained, testing the ice's structure. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. With practiced precision, Brooke began carving handholds into the ice wall. Each strike of her axe sent musical notes echoing across the frozen landscape, and Vrel noticed something extraordinary. The crystals seemed to resonate with each strike, creating patterns of light that rippled through their structure. They're responding to kinetic energy, Dakota breathed, her scientific curiosity momentarily overwhelming their urgent mission. The whole formation is like one giant crystalline nervous system. Less analyzing, more moving, Kaz urged, already clipping into the safety line Brooke had established. We're losing daylight, and trust me, we don't want to be out here when night falls. The team moved through the carved passage with practiced efficiency, their breathing measured despite the exertion. Vrel's sensors detected their core temperatures dropping, yet instead of deteriorating, their performance seemed to be improving. It's called cold adaptation, Nikolai explained, noting Vrel's puzzled readings. Human bodies can actually generate additional heat through something we call brown fat activation. The colder it gets, the more efficient the process becomes. They reached the station's interior, where the scene was worse than their initial scans suggested. The crystal formations had transformed familiar corridors into alien landscapes. Emergency lights pulsed weakly through layers of ice, creating disorienting shadows. Life signs stronger now, River reported through their comms from the shuttle. Getting readings from 3 distinct locations. Looks like the researchers managed to separate into survival groups when the systems failed. Ryia made a quick decision. We split into pairs. Dakota and Nikolai take the east wing, Brooke and Kaz West Wing. I'll escort our observer to the central hub. That's where the strongest life signs are reading. Splitting up is tactically unsound, Vrel protested. These conditions are exactly why we need to split up, Ryia interrupted. Every minute we waste means lower survival chances for the researchers. Humans don't just endure cold. We've learned to work with it, to push through it. Trust us. The team separated, each carrying minimal rescue gear, lightweight thermal blankets, portable heat sources, and emergency medical supplies. Vrel watched in amazement as the humans moved with increasing surety through the frozen corridors, their bodies seeming to adapt to the extreme conditions rather than succumb to them. I hear is something else you should understand about humans, Ryia said as they navigated toward the central hub. We don't just survive because of our physiology. We survive because we refuse to accept failure when lives are at stake. They reached the central hub's doors, now frozen shut by a particularly dense formation of crystals. Through the ice-covered viewport, they could make out huddled forms inside. Survivors gathered around a failing emergency heater. Those crystals are at least 2 meters thick, Vrel observed. Even with your tools, cutting through would take hours they don't have. Ryia smiled, pulling out what looked like a primitive thermic charge. Who said anything about cutting? Sometimes you have to think beyond conventional solutions. That explosive device will never maintain cohesion in these temperatures, Vrel protested. The chemical reaction is exactly what these crystals have been responding to, Ryia interrupted, placing the charge with practiced precision. Energy creates patterns. Patterns can be disrupted, and humans? We're very good at creative disruption. A deafening crack echoed through the station as Rya's thermic charge detonated. The crystalline formation didn't just break it, shattered in a cascade of resonating fragments, each piece catching and refracting the emergency lights in a deadly beautiful display. Pattern disruption successful, Ryia announced, already moving through the opening. Now we work fast. Inside the central hub, they found 8 researchers, 3 Centaurians, 2 Martian colonists, and 3 Jovians, huddled around a dying heat source. Their environmental suits had failed hours ago, and even the naturally cold-resistant species were showing signs of severe hypothermia. Impossible, one of the Centaurians whispered through chattering mandibles. Humans shouldn't be able to function in these temperatures. We get that a lot, Ryia responded, already administering emergency thermal treatments. Nikolai, what's your status? East Wing secured. His voice crackled through the comms. Found 4 survivors, all stable enough for transport. Dakota's rigged a temporary power source to keep their section from complete collapse. West Wing is complicated. Kaz cut in, his voice strained. We've got 6 survivors, but the crystal growth is accelerating. Brooks keeping the structure stable, but we need immediate evac. Vrel's sensors suddenly registered a critical shift in the station's structural integrity. The crystal formations weren't just growing, they were evolving, learning from each disruption, adapting their patterns to become stronger. The entire station is becoming one interconnected crystalline entity. Dakota's voice held a mix of scientific fascination and urgent concern. Every energy source we use, every vibration we create, it learns and adapts. We've got maybe 10 minutes before. The station groaned, a deep, resonating sound that seemed to come from the very molecules of its structure. Overhead, the reinforced ceiling began to splinter as new crystal formations exploded through it, growing at impossible speeds. Everybody move, Ryia shouted, helping the weakened researchers to their feet. Head for the east corridor now. They had barely made it 5 steps when the first support beam gave way. Crystalline shards rained down, each impact creating new growth points. The very floor beneath them began to transform, ice patterns spreading like living fractals. Fascinating, Vrel observed, their scientific training momentarily overriding their survival instincts. The crystals are exhibiting collective behavior, almost like a neural network. Admire it later. Ryia grabbed them, pulling them away from a rapidly forming crystal spear. River, we need immediate evac. Plot multiple escape routes. This entire place is coming down. But their path to the east corridor was already blocked, massive crystal formations creating an impassable barrier. The survivors, weakened by hours of exposure, could barely stand, let alone navigate the increasingly treacherous terrain. That's when Brooks' voice came through, clear and determined. I've got a crazy idea. Those are usually our best ones, Kaz responded immediately. The crystals respond to energy patterns, right? What if we create a resonance cascade? Use their own growth pattern against them. Dakota's voice crackled with sudden understanding. Like creating a controlled demolition, but with sonic frequencies instead of explosives. It could work, but the timing would have to be perfect. And we'd need someone to place the resonators manually, Brooke added. In the worst of the crystal growth, Ryia looked at her team through the station's failing camera system, seeing the determination in their faces. This was what humans did best, finding solutions where none should exist, pushing beyond normal limitations not just for survival, but for the survival of others. "I'll do it," she declared, already pulling resonator components from her pack. "Nikolai, get your group to the shuttle. Kaz, Brooke, start your evacuation. Dakota, guide me through the placement points. We've got one shot at this." The temperature in those growth zones is approaching -350°C, Vrel protested. "Even with your adaptations, exposure at that level will cause immediate tissue damage." "Probably," Ryia agreed, calibrating the first resonator. "But you know what humans are really good at? Doing the impossible anyway." What followed was a display of human endurance that would later become legendary in galactic rescue circles. Ryia moved through the crystal-infested corridors, placing resonators with surgical precision despite the bone-cracking cold. Her vital signs showed clear signs of physical trauma. Frostbite setting in, muscles seizing, core temperature dropping dangerously. "How?" Vrel asked, helping guide the survivors toward the evacuation point. "Your body should have shut down by now." "That's the thing about humans," Ryia managed through gritted teeth, placing the final resonator. "We don't just endure, we choose to push through. The cold is just information, it doesn't have to be a limitation." The resonators activated in sequence, creating a cascading wave of sonic disruption. The crystal formations began to vibrate, their structure destabilizing as the carefully calculated frequencies tore through their neural network. "Now that," Dakota's voice held a note of triumph, "is what I call creative problem-solving." The entire station shuddered as the crystal network began to collapse, creating a brief but crucial window for escape. The team moved with coordinated precision, guiding the survivors through the disintegrating structure, using the very destruction they'd caused as cover for their evacuation. And through it all, Ryia kept moving, kept pushing, even as her body screamed for surrender. Because that's what humans do. They redefine possible, one impossible step at a time. The evacuation through Niflheim's intensifying storm pushed the human team to their absolute limits, and then beyond. Vrel's sensors could barely keep up with the physiological changes they were witnessing in their human subjects. Core temperatures are approaching critical levels. Nikolai reported from the shuttle's medical bay, where he was treating the first group of evacuees, but our compensatory responses are actually improving. The human body is remarkable in how it adapts to sustained extreme conditions. Outside, Ryia led the final group through what had become a gauntlet of imploding crystal structures. Her movements were slower now, the cost of her exposure during the resonator placement becoming evident. Yet somehow her focus remained laser-sharp. Their cognitive functions should be severely impaired at these temperatures, Vrel noted, watching in amazement as Ryia calculated a safe path through the collapsing chaos. Instead, they appear to be achieving an enhanced state of situational awareness. "Survival mode," Brooke explained, securing another guide rope for the evacuees. "When everything else shuts down, humans tap into something more primitive, more powerful. We call it our second wind." The station behind them was now completely transformed, the crystal network collapsing in on itself in a spectacular display of destructive geometry. Each failure created new growth. Each growth led to new failures. A cascade of beautiful devastation. Dakota, monitoring the collapse from the shuttle sensors, spotted the pattern first. The crystal network isn't just falling apart, it's learning from its own destruction. The new formations are growing faster, stronger, adapting to our resonance frequency. "How long?" Kaz asked, helping a struggling Centaurian researcher through particularly deep snow. "Minutes, maybe less. When those load-bearing crystals fail, they'll take everything within half a kilometer with them." Ryia, her movements now visibly stiff from frostbite, made a quick calculation. "We won't all make it at this pace. The researchers are too weak, too slow. Then, we carry them," Brooke stated simply, already moving to lift a Jovian nearly twice her size. What followed was a display of human endurance that defied every physiological limit Vrel had studied. The team moved through the lethal cold carrying beings much larger and heavier than themselves. their muscles working far beyond normal capacity, their frozen lungs somehow still drawing enough oxygen to function. "This is medically impossible," Vrel protested, watching as Kaz shouldered the weight of 2 Martian colonists. "Your muscles should be failing, your tendons snapping from the cold." "Probably are," Kaz grunted, pushing forward through another gust of crystalline wind. "We'll deal with that later." "Later? Your tissues are literally freezing. Pain is just information," Ryia called back, her voice hoarse but determined. "And information can be processed later. Right now, we move." The crystal collapse was gaining on them, each thunderous crack sending shockwaves through the frozen ground. The shuttle seemed impossibly far, a dim shape in the swirling ice storm. By every logical measure, by every scientific calculation, they should have already failed. But humans, as Vrel was learning, had a peculiar relationship with the word should. "Their bodies are breaking," Vrel reported to the shuttle's medical systems. "And yet their performance metrics are actually improving. How is this possible?" Dakota, coordinating their final approach, answered through chattering teeth. "Because humans don't just push limits, we transcend them. When failure isn't an option, we find a way to succeed, even if it means breaking ourselves in the process." And in that moment, watching these supposedly fragile beings carry others to safety through conditions that should have killed them instantly, Vrel finally understood something profound about humans. Their true strength wasn't in their bodies at all. It was in their absolutely unshakable refusal to accept defeat when others' lives were at stake. The final moments of the rescue would later be studied in rescue operation training centers across the galaxy. As the crystal collapse reached its crescendo, the human team executed what seemed like a choreographed dance of impossibility. The shuttle's loading ramp became their final battleground. Wind speeds had reached levels that could strip flesh from bone, and the crystal formations were now exploding from the ground like living geysers. Yet the humans moved with an almost supernatural coordination, forming a chain to pass the weakened survivors up the ramp. "Engine core temperature critical," River called from the cockpit. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before the cold seizes our launch systems." Ryia, her exposed skin now showing severe frostbite, orchestrated the loading sequence with unwavering focus. "Brooke, secure the Jovians. Kaz, get those Centaurians strapped in. Dakota, start your pre-launch sequence." "What about you?" Vrel asked, noticing she hadn't moved up the ramp. "Someone has to bring up the rear," she replied, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Make sure no one gets left behind." The final moments were a blur of motion and determination. As the last researcher was secured, the crystal collapse reached its apex. The ground beneath the shuttle began to fracture, living ice reaching up to claim one final prize. That's when Ryia showed what human leadership truly meant. Despite her injuries, despite the killing cold, she physically pushed Brooke and Kaz up the ramp before finally allowing herself to be pulled aboard. "Launch! Now!" she commanded, and River didn't hesitate. The shuttle broke free, just as the crystal network reached critical mass. Behind them, the research station and everything within a kilometer disappeared in a spectacular implosion of geometric beauty. Later, in the medical bay, as the team received treatment for severe frostbite, hypothermia, and tissue damage, Vrel completed their official observation report with a single, powerful conclusion. Human fragility is an illusion. Their true strength lies not in their physical adaptations, but in their unshakable determination to save others regardless of personal cost. They don't merely survive impossible conditions, they transcend them through sheer force of will and unwavering teamwork. In retrospect, they weren't just the best choice for this rescue mission, they were the only choice. Ryia, hearing this as she received treatment, simply smiled. "We're not special," she said. "We just never learned when to quit." But the gleam in her eyes suggested she was already thinking about the next impossible rescue. The Galactic Emergency Response Center updated its species classification protocols 1 month after the Niflheim rescue. Humans were recategorized from limited environmental tolerance to adaptive crisis specialists, with a special note regarding their unique capacity for cold weather operations. Commander Zixtal personally oversaw the creation of a new joint species rescue training program, with the Frostwolves team serving as primary instructors. The program became known for its motto, borrowed from Ryia's team: "Limitations are just suggestions." The crystal formations from Niflheim became the subject of intensive study, with Dakota leading the research team. They discovered that the crystal's adaptive properties had actually been mimicking human resilience patterns, evolving and strengthening in response to adversity, just as their human adversaries had done. Vrel went on to publish a groundbreaking paper titled Adaptive Resilience: The Human Paradox, which revolutionized xenobiology's understanding of species classification. Their central thesis was simple. True survival potential couldn't be measured by natural adaptations alone, but by the combination of physical capability, psychological resilience, and most importantly, the determination to save others despite personal cost. As for the frost wolves, they were already planning their next impossible rescue.